In a distant corner of the galaxy, where stars burned like tiny lanterns in an endless night, humanity had found its place among the cosmos. For centuries, Earth had been part of the Galactic Council, an alliance of dozens of alien species working together to maintain peace and order across the stars. But peace was fragile, and tensions often simmered beneath the surface. The humans were seen as newcomers, young and reckless compared to the ancient civilizations that dominated the Council. And now, something had happened that would shatter what little trust remained. It began on a small colony world named Horizon 7, located on the outer edge of explored space. Horizon 7 was not a grand or important planet. It was just a quiet settlement where families lived simple lives, farming crops under artificial sunlight and raising children who dreamed of seeing the stars. Among those children was Ethan Carter, an 8-year-old boy with bright eyes and a curious mind. Ethan loved building model ships out of scraps he found around the colony. His parents, Daniel and Rachel Carter, often teased him about how one day he might captain a real spaceship. They never imagined their son's life would become the center of a galactic storm. One ordinary afternoon, everything changed. A team of Galactic Council enforcers arrived at Horizon 7 for what they called a routine inspection. These inspections were common but rarely pleasant. The enforcers, clad in sleek silver armor and armed with advanced weapons, swept through the colony looking for anything that violated Council laws. Most of the time, these visits ended with fines or warnings. This time, however, things went horribly wrong. Ethan had been playing near the colony's main storage facility when the enforcers approached. He wasn't doing anything dangerous, just chasing after a toy ship he dropped. But one of the aliens mistook his movements for aggression. Before anyone could intervene, the enforcer fired a stun blast meant for criminals, not children. The shot hit Ethan squarely in the chest, knocking him to the ground. By the time medics arrived, it was too late. Ethan was gone. News of the tragedy spread quickly, first through the colony and then across Earth. People were horrified and angry. How could the Council treat a human child this way? Protests erupted in cities around the globe, with crowds chanting for justice. Ethan's parents became symbols of the outrage, their faces appearing on news broadcasts as they demanded answers. He was just a boy, Rachel said during one emotional interview. He didn't deserve to die. The United Earth Government, UAG, which represented humanity in the Galactic Council, tried to calm the situation. Leaders promised to investigate the incident and hold the responsible parties accountable. But behind closed doors, there was hesitation. The Council held immense power, and many feared retaliation if Earth pushed too hard. Some even suggested letting the matter drop to avoid conflict. While politicians debated, whispers of a darker solution began to circulate. Hidden deep within Earth's classified archives was a secret known only to a few: the existence of the Eclipse Armada. Long ago, before humanity joined the Council, Earth had built a massive fleet designed to protect the planet from any threat. Equipped with experimental technology far ahead of its time, the Armada was mothballed after treaties brought peace. Now, some believed it might be the only way to make the Council listen. For Daniel and Rachel Carter, the loss of their son felt unbearable. Yet, amidst their grief, they also felt a spark of hope. If Earth could find the courage to stand up to the Council, perhaps Ethan's death wouldn't be in vain. Little did they know, their fight for justice was about to awaken forces long forgotten and ignite a war that would shake the galaxy to its core. In the weeks following Ethan Carter's death, the mood on Earth grew darker. People were angry, not just because of what had happened to Ethan, but because the Galactic Council seemed unwilling to take responsibility. Official statements from the Council described the incident as a regrettable misunderstanding, offering no apology or promise of punishment for the enforcer who fired the fatal shot. To many humans, this lack of accountability felt like a slap in the face. Protests continued, and calls for action grew louder. Yet the United Earth Government, UAG, remained cautious, afraid of escalating tensions further. Amidst all the chaos, a young woman named Grace Bennett stumbled upon something that would change everything. Grace worked as a historian for the UEG, spending most of her days buried in dusty archives and forgotten records. She wasn't involved in politics or military matters. She simply loved uncovering pieces of humanity's past. One day, while researching old documents about Earth's early space exploration efforts, she came across a file labeled Project Eclipse. At first, she thought it was just another historical curiosity, but as she read deeper, her eyes widened in disbelief. The file detailed the existence of a secret fleet known as the Eclipse Armada. Built centuries ago, long before humanity joined the Galactic Council, the Armada was designed to defend Earth against any alien threat. It consisted of massive ships equipped with advanced weapons and cloaking technology far beyond anything currently used by human forces. The project had been abandoned once peace treaties were signed, and the fleet was supposedly dismantled, or so everyone thought. According to the records, the ships were still intact, hidden deep beneath the icy surface of Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. Grace couldn't believe what she was reading. If the Eclipse Armada really existed, it could be humanity's best chance to stand up to the Council without relying on modern ships, which were heavily monitored. Her hands trembled as she printed out the files and rushed to share her discovery with someone who might understand its significance. That someone was Admiral Samuel Hayes, a veteran leader known for his sharp mind and unwavering dedication to protecting Earth. Admiral Hayes listened carefully as Grace explained what she had found. At first, he was skeptical. The idea of reviving an ancient fleet sounded like science fiction. But as she showed him the evidence, blueprints, maintenance logs, even crew rosters, he began to see the potential. The Council had grown complacent, assuming humanity wouldn't dare challenge their authority. If the Eclipse Armada could be brought back online, it might give Earth the leverage it needed to demand justice for Ethan and prevent future tragedies. Hayes agreed to investigate further, ordering a small team to travel to Europa and locate the fleet. He kept the operation secret, knowing that if word got out, it could spark panic or provoke the Council into attacking preemptively. As preparations began, Grace volunteered to assist, using her knowledge of history to help decipher the old systems aboard the ships. Though nervous about stepping outside her usual role, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced before. This wasn't just about uncovering the past. It was about shaping the future. Meanwhile, news of Ethan's death continued to spread, fueling outrage across Earth. Families gathered in public squares, holding pictures of their loved ones, and chanting slogans like "Never Again" and "Justice for Ethan." Daniel and Rachel Carter became prominent figures in the movement, speaking at rallies and urging people to keep pushing for change. They didn't know about the Eclipse Armada yet, but they could feel the tide shifting. Humanity was tired of being treated as second-class citizens in the galaxy. Back on Europa, engineers worked tirelessly to reactivate the dormant fleet. The icy moon's harsh environment made progress slow, but every breakthrough brought them closer to unlocking the Armada's full potential. Among the crew was Lieutenant Ryan Cole, a skilled pilot with a haunted past. Ryan had lost friends in previous conflicts and carried the weight of those memories with him everywhere he went. Now, as he helped bring the ancient ships back to life, he felt a flicker of hope, a chance to make things right, not just for Ethan, but for all of humanity. Though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: Earth was preparing to fight back. The Council had underestimated humanity once too often, and now, hidden beneath the ice of Europa, the tools of retribution waited to be unleashed. The icy surface of Europa loomed large as the team of engineers and technicians descended into the frozen depths. Guided by ancient maps and Grace Bennett's research, they had pinpointed the location of the Eclipse Armada, a hidden vault buried kilometers beneath the moon's crust. The journey was treacherous, with jagged ice formations and freezing temperatures testing their resolve at every step. But no one complained. They all knew what was at stake. the chance to give humanity a fighting chance against the Galactic Council. When they finally broke through the thick layer of ice and reached the vault, what they found took their breath away. Row after row of massive ships stretched out before them, perfectly preserved in the cold vacuum. Each vessel gleamed faintly under the dim emergency lights that flickered to life as the team entered. The ships were unlike anything currently used by Earth's fleet, sleek, powerful, and bristling with weapons systems that looked like they belonged in a museum of futuristic technology. It was clear these ships had been designed for war, not exploration. Lieutenant Ryan Cole stood among the crew, his eyes scanning the armada with a mix of awe and disbelief. He had spent years flying modern spacecraft, but nothing compared to this. These ships were legends, relics of a time when humanity believed it needed to defend itself from overwhelming threats. As he ran his hand along the hull of one ship, he felt a strange sense of connection, as if the vessel itself was waiting to be awakened. Grace worked alongside the engineers, helping them decipher the old control systems. Many of the interfaces were outdated, written in programming languages that hadn't been used in centuries. But Grace's knowledge of history proved invaluable. She pieced together fragments of information, guiding the team through the process of reactivating the ship's power cores. One by one, the vessels hummed to life, their engines glowing softly as energy coursed through their systems. Admiral Samuel Hayes monitored the operation from a command center set up near the entrance of the vault. He watched the progress with a mixture of pride and anxiety. The Eclipse Armada was humanity's best hope, but reviving it came with risks. If the Council discovered what Earth was doing, it could provoke an immediate attack. Hayes knew they had to move quickly and quietly. Every second counted. As the first few ships became operational, Ryan and a small group of pilots began training on them. The controls were unfamiliar, requiring intense focus and quick reflexes. At times, Ryan felt overwhelmed, but he refused to give up. Flying these ships wasn't just about mastering new technology. It was about proving that humanity still had the strength to stand up for itself. During breaks, he often talked with Sarah Blake, the communications officer assigned to the mission. Sarah had a calm demeanor that balanced Ryan's intensity, and the two formed a bond as they prepared for what lay ahead. Back on Earth, tensions continued to rise. Protests grew larger, with people demanding action from the United Earth Government, UEG. Daniel and Rachel Carter remained at the forefront of the movement, speaking out about their son's death and urging leaders to take a stand. Though they didn't know about the Eclipse Armada, they could feel something shifting in the air. Humanity was tired of being pushed around, and whispers of rebellion spread like wildfire. Meanwhile, Admiral Hayes faced pressure from within the UEG. Some officials argued that reviving the Armada was too dangerous and would only escalate the conflict. Others believed it was necessary to send a message to the Council that humanity wouldn't tolerate injustice anymore. Hayes listened to both sides but ultimately sided with those who wanted to act. "We've been patient long enough," he said during one heated meeting. "It's time to remind the Council that we're not afraid to fight for what's right." As the days passed, more ships in the Eclipse Armada came online, each one adding to Earth's growing strength. The engineers worked tirelessly, knowing there was no room for error. The fate of humanity rested in their hands, and they were determined not to fail. For Ryan, Grace, and everyone involved, the mission was more than just a job. It was a chance to rewrite history and ensure that Ethan Carter's death would never be forgotten. The Eclipse Armada was ready to awaken, and with it, humanity's determination to seek justice burned brighter than ever. The Eclipse Armada was finally ready. After weeks of hard work, the ancient fleet had been brought back to life, its ships gleaming with power and purpose. Admiral Samuel Hayes stood on the bridge of the flagship, a massive vessel named Eclipse Dawn, watching as his crew prepared for what lay ahead. The air was tense but filled with determination. Everyone knew this mission was risky, but no one hesitated, not after what had happened to Ethan Carter. Grace Bennett sat at a console nearby, her fingers flying over the controls as she monitored the fleet's systems. She still couldn't believe how far they'd come in such a short time. The ships were more advanced than anything currently used by humanity, and their experimental weapons gave Earth an edge it desperately needed. But Grace also knew that technology alone wouldn't win this fight. It would take courage, strategy, and unity to stand up to the Galactic Council. Lieutenant Ryan Cole was among the first pilots to test the new ships. Flying them felt like nothing he'd ever experienced before. The controls were smooth and responsive, and the ship seemed to anticipate his every move. During training exercises, Ryan pushed the vessels to their limits, testing their speed, agility, and firepower. Each flight left him more confident, but also more aware of the responsibility resting on his shoulders. These ships weren't just machines. They were symbols of hope for billions of people back on Earth. Sarah Blake worked closely with Ryan, ensuring communication between the ships remained seamless. Her role was critical. Without clear coordination, the fleet would be vulnerable. Sarah spent hours running simulations, practicing emergency protocols, and making sure every crew member understood their part in the mission. Though she wasn't a pilot herself, she felt just as connected to the cause. Every message she sent, every order she relayed, brought humanity one step closer to justice. Admiral Hayes called a meeting to discuss the next phase of the plan. The Eclipse Armada would soon leave Europa and head toward Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council's central hub, a colossal orbital station that served as the Council's seat of power. Hayes explained that their goal wasn't to destroy Nexus Prime outright, but to strike key targets within the station. By disabling its power grid and communication arrays, they could cripple the Council's ability to respond while sending a clear message. Humanity would not tolerate injustice anymore. "We're not doing this for revenge," Hayes said firmly, looking around the room at his team. "We're doing it so no child ever has to suffer like Ethan did again. This is about protecting our future." The crew nodded, their resolve stronger than ever. They knew the risks involved. If the Council discovered the Armada's location, they would retaliate with overwhelming force. But hiding wasn't an option, not when lives were at stake. As the meeting ended, Ryan approached Hayes privately. "Sir," he said, his voice steady, "I want to leave the initial strike team." Hayes studied him for a moment, then nodded. He trusted Ryan's skill and determination. Back on Earth, Daniel and Rachel Carter continued to speak out, keeping the memory of their son alive. Their story resonated with millions of people who rallied behind them, demanding change. Though the Carters didn't know about the Eclipse Armada, they felt a shift in the atmosphere. Something big was coming, something that might finally hold the Council accountable. As the Armada prepared to launch, Grace double-checked the navigation systems, ensuring the ship's cloaking technology would keep them hidden until the last possible moment. The journey to Nexus Prime would take several days, giving the crew time to rest and prepare. But no one relaxed completely. The weight of what they were about to do hung over them all. Finally, the order came. The Eclipse Armada slipped into space, invisible to the Council's sensors. For now, the galaxy remained unaware of the storm approaching Nexus Prime. Humanity's ancient fleet was on the move, carrying not just weapons, but the hopes of an entire species. Justice was no longer just a dream. It was a mission, and failure was not an option. The Eclipse Armada drifted silently through the void of space, its ships cloaked and undetectable. For days, the fleet traveled toward Nexus Prime, the heart of the Galactic Council's power. The journey was tense but quiet, with every crew member focused on their tasks. Lieutenant Ryan Cole spent hours in the simulator, practicing maneuvers and running attack scenarios. He knew the success of the mission depended on precision. Every shot had to count. Sarah Blake worked tirelessly beside him, fine-tuning communication systems and ensuring that each ship in the Armada could stay connected during the chaos of battle. Admiral Samuel Hayes kept a close eye on everything from the bridge of Eclipse Dawn. His expression rarely changed, but inside, he felt the weight of what they were about to do. This wasn't just another military operation. It was a statement. Humanity had been pushed too far, and now it was time to push back. Hayes wanted to make sure the Council understood one thing: Earth would not tolerate injustice anymore. Grace Bennett stayed busy reviewing intel gathered by reconnaissance drones sent ahead of the fleet. The data painted a clear picture of Nexus Prime, a sprawling orbital station bristling with defenses. But something stood out to Grace. The Council seemed overconfident. Their patrols were sparse, and their weapons platforms appeared unmanned. It was as if they believed no one would dare challenge them. "They're arrogant," Grace muttered to herself as she studied the images. She reported her findings to Admiral Hayes, who nodded grimly. "They underestimate us," Hayes said. "Good. Let's use that to our advantage." As the Armada approached Nexus Prime, the crew prepared for the first strike. Ryan led a squadron of pilots tasked with disabling key infrastructure targets. Their mission was simple but dangerous: take out the station's power grid and communication arrays without causing widespread destruction. If successful, the attack would cripple Nexus Prime's ability to coordinate a response while sending a clear message to the Council. The night before the operation, Ryan found himself unable to sleep. He wandered onto the observation deck, where Sarah was already gazing out at the stars. "Can't rest?" she asked softly. Ryan shook his head. "Too much riding on this," he admitted. "If we fail." He trailed off, but Sarah finished his thought. "We won't fail," she said firmly. "Not after everything we've done to get here." Her confidence reassured him, and for the first time in days, Ryan felt a flicker of calm. When the moment came, the Eclipse Armada moved into position. Under cover of darkness, the ships decloaked just long enough to launch their assault. Precision strikes hit Nexus Prime's defenses, knocking out shield generators and leaving the station vulnerable. Alarms blared across the Council's hub as chaos erupted. Council officials scrambled to respond, but their outdated tactics proved useless against the advanced technology of the ancient fleet. Ryan led his squadron into the fray, targeting a massive battleship guarding the station. The enemy vessel fired blindly, its weapons struggling to lock onto the agile human ships. Ryan's fighter darted through the storm of laser fire, weaving between explosions as he lined up his shot. With a final burst of energy, he destroyed the battleship's main cannon, rendering it harmless. Cheers erupted over the comms as the rest of the squadron followed suit, taking down additional targets with surgical precision. Back on Eclipse Dawn, Admiral Hayes watched the battle unfold with satisfaction. The Council's arrogance had left them unprepared, and now they were paying the price. But Hayes knew this was only the beginning. The real challenge would come when the Council realized who was behind the attack, and why. For now, though, the Eclipse Armada had struck a blow that couldn't be ignored. Nexus Prime was reeling, its once impenetrable defenses crumbling under the weight of humanity's resolve. As the first phase of the mission ended, Ryan and his fellow pilots returned to the fleet, their spirits high but their focus sharp. Justice had begun its march, and there was no turning back. The attack on Nexus Prime sent shockwaves through the Galactic Council. For years, they had operated under the assumption that humanity was too weak and divided to pose any real threat. But now, their central hub was in chaos. Power grids were down, communication systems were crippled, and panic spread among council members as they scrambled to figure out who had dared to strike them. Admiral Samuel Hayes watched the aftermath unfold from the bridge of Eclipse Dawn. The first phase of the mission had been a success, but he knew better than to celebrate too soon. The Council's arrogance had made them vulnerable, but they still held immense power. It wouldn't take long for them to regroup and retaliate. "We've bought ourselves some time," Hayes said to his crew, his voice steady but firm. "But this isn't over yet." Grace Bennett reviewed the damage reports coming in from reconnaissance drones. The precision strikes had done exactly what they were meant to do: disable key systems without causing unnecessary destruction or loss of life. Still, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that the Council would see this as an act of war, and she was right. Within hours, Chancellor Varnock, the leader of the Galactic Council, issued a public statement condemning the attack. He called it an unprovoked act of aggression and demanded Earth surrender those responsible. Back on Earth, the news of the successful strike reached the United Earth Government, UEG. At first, there was confusion. No one had authorized such a bold move, but when details about the Eclipse Armada leaked, leaders realized what had happened. Some were furious, accusing Admiral Hayes of overstepping his authority. Others, however, saw the potential in using the Armada as leverage. If the Council thought humanity was willing to fight back, they might finally agree to negotiate. Daniel and Rachel Carter heard about the attack during a live broadcast. Though they didn't know the full story behind it, they felt a surge of hope. For months, they had pleaded for justice for their son Ethan, only to be met with silence or excuses. Now, someone was finally standing up to the Council, and doing so in a way that couldn't be ignored. "Maybe this is what we needed," Daniel said quietly, holding Rachel's hand. A wake-up call. Meanwhile, aboard the Eclipse Armada, Lieutenant Ryan Cole and Sarah Blake prepared for the next step. The initial strike had weakened Nexus Prime, but the Council's forces were already mobilizing. Reinforcements were en route, and the Armada would need to stay one step ahead if they wanted to keep the upper hand. Ryan spent hours studying maps of the station, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. Sarah worked alongside him, coordinating with other pilots and ensuring everyone understood the plan. Admiral Hayes called another meeting to discuss strategy. "The Council will want revenge," he warned. "They'll throw everything they have at us. Our advantage is speed and stealth. We hit hard, then disappear before they can respond." He turned to Ryan. "Your squadron will leave the next wave. Focus on their supply lines and docking bays. Without resources, they'll struggle to mount a counterattack." Ryan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders once again. Leading the attack wasn't just about skill, it was about making sure every decision counted. As he left the meeting, Sarah caught up with him. "You okay?" she asked, her tone soft but concerned. Ryan forced a smile. "I'll manage," he replied. "Just trying to stay focused." As the Eclipse Armada moved into position for the second strike, the crew braced themselves for what lay ahead. They had struck a blow against the Council, but the fight was far from over. Nexus Prime was still operational, and the Council's forces were closing in. The coming days would test their resolve and determine whether humanity's gamble would pay off. For now, though, the Armada remained hidden, its ships cloaked and ready to strike again. Justice had begun its march, and the galaxy was watching. The second wave of attacks against Nexus Prime was swift and calculated. Under Admiral Samuel Hayes' command, the Eclipse Armada struck again, targeting supply lines and docking bays as planned. Lieutenant Ryan Cole led his squadron with precision, taking out key infrastructure while avoiding civilian casualties. The Council's forces were caught off guard once more, their defenses still weakened from the first assault. Explosions lit up the darkness of space as cargo ships and fuel depots were destroyed, leaving Nexus Prime struggling to sustain its operations. Chancellor Varnock, the leader of the Galactic Council, watched the chaos unfold from the safety of his private quarters aboard the station. His face was pale, his usual air of superiority replaced by fear and frustration. For decades, the Council had ruled unchallenged, its dominance unquestioned. Now, an ancient fleet they didn't even know existed had brought them to their knees. "This cannot stand," Varnock muttered to his advisors. "We must retaliate immediately." But retaliation wasn't so simple. The Eclipse Armada's cloaking technology made it nearly impossible to track, and its advanced weaponry outmatched anything the Council currently possessed. Every attempt to locate the fleet ended in failure, leaving the Council's military commanders frustrated and desperate. Publicly, Varnock continued to denounce Earth's actions as barbaric, but privately, he began to doubt whether humanity could be subdued through force alone. Back on Earth, news of the ongoing conflict reached the United Earth Government, UEG. Leaders were divided. Some wanted to distance themselves from the Eclipse Armada, fearing it would escalate tensions further. Others saw an opportunity to negotiate from a position of strength. Daniel and Rachel Carter, who had become symbols of the movement for justice, urged leaders to push forward. "If we stop now, Ethan's death will mean nothing," Rachel said during a heated meeting. Her words resonated with many, and slowly the tide began to turn. Admiral Hayes knew the Armada couldn't keep striking indefinitely. Sooner or later, the Council would find a way to counter their tactics. That's why he proposed a bold move. Send a message directly to Nexus Prime, demanding negotiations. "We've shown them we're not afraid to fight," Hayes told his crew. "Now it's time to show them we're also willing to talk, if they meet our terms." Grace Bennett helped draft the message, ensuring it was clear and firm. The UEG officially disavowed any connection to the Eclipse Armada, but the underlying threat was obvious. Unless the Council agreed to address humanity's grievances, the attacks would continue. When the message reached Nexus Prime, Chancellor Varnock hesitated. He didn't want to appear weak, but he also couldn't ignore the destruction caused by the mysterious fleet. Reluctantly, Varnock agreed to talks. A neutral location, a small orbital platform near a distant star, was chosen for the negotiations. Representatives from both sides gathered, each side wary of the other. Daniel and Rachel Carter attended as well, representing all those affected by the Council's actions. Their presence reminded everyone of the human cost of the conflict. During the discussions, Grace presented evidence of systemic neglect and abuse toward human colonies, exposing years of mistreatment by the Council. Her presentation shocked many attendees, including some alien delegates who hadn't realized how deeply rooted the problem was. Chancellor Varnock tried to deflect blame, claiming these issues were isolated incidents, but his arguments rang hollow. As the negotiations dragged on, tensions remained high. Both sides accused the other of bad faith, and progress was slow. Ryan and Sarah monitored the situation from the Eclipse Armada, ready to act if the Council broke the fragile truce. Despite the uncertainty, there was hope. For the first time, humanity had forced the Council to listen, and that alone was a victory worth celebrating. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if peace could be achieved, or if war would consume them all. As the negotiations continued aboard the neutral orbital platform, cracks began to form within humanity's ranks. Not everyone believed in the Eclipse Armada's mission or its methods. Senator Laura Monroe, a prominent critic of military action, voiced her concerns loudly and often. She argued that escalating tensions with the Galactic Council would only lead to more bloodshed, not peace. "We're playing with fire," she warned during a closed-door session with United Earth Government (UEG) leaders. "If we push too hard, we risk losing everything." Unbeknownst to the UEG, Senator Monroe had already made contact with Chancellor Varnock through secret channels. In exchange for promises of political favors and protection for Earth, she leaked critical information about the Eclipse Armada's location. Though she justified her actions as necessary for humanity's survival, many would later see them as betrayal. Chancellor Varnock seized the opportunity immediately. With the Armada's coordinates in hand, he ordered a surprise counterattack. The Council's fleet moved swiftly, catching the Eclipse Armada off guard. Cloaking technology couldn't hide the ships forever, and once their position was revealed, they became sitting targets. Alarms blared across the fleet as enemy vessels appeared on scanners, weapons locked and ready to fire. Lieutenant Ryan Cole scrambled to his fighter, adrenaline coursing through him as chaos erupted around him. The Council's ambush was brutal and efficient. Several ships in the Armada were hit before they could even decloak fully, including one commanded by Captain Alex Green, a close friend of Ryan's. As Alex's ship exploded in a fiery burst, Ryan clenched his fists, grief mixing with anger. He wanted revenge, but he knew now wasn't the time. Surviving this attack had to come first. Admiral Samuel Hayes barked orders from the bridge of Eclipse Dawn, trying to rally what remained of the fleet. "Stay sharp," he shouted. "We've faced worse than this." But deep down, Even Hayes felt doubt creeping in. The Council had struck back harder than expected, and the Armada was taking heavy losses. Grace Bennett worked frantically at her station, rerouting power to damaged systems and coordinating evasive maneuvers. Her hands trembled, but she refused to give up. If the Armada fell, so did humanity's hope for justice. Sarah Blake stayed glued to her communications console, guiding pilots through the chaos. "Ryan, you've got bogeys on your tail," she called out over the comms. Ryan glanced at his monitors, spotting 3 Council fighters closing in fast. He pulled his ship into a tight spiral, narrowly avoiding their shots. His heart pounded as he lined up a counterattack, destroying one enemy fighter before diving toward another. Each victory felt hollow. Too many good people had already been lost. Back aboard Eclipse Dawn, Admiral Hayes made a difficult decision. "Fall back," he ordered. "Regroup and reassess." It pained him to retreat, but staying in the fight any longer would mean total annihilation. One by one, the surviving ships of the Armada disengage, using their superior speed and agility to slip away from the Council's forces. When they finally reached a safe distance, the crew took stock of the damage. Several ships were gone, along with countless lives. Among the fallen was Captain Alex Green, whose sacrifice weighed heavily on Ryan. "We'll make them pay," Ryan vowed quietly, staring out at the stars. Sarah stood beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We will," she said firmly. "But not today." The loss shook everyone, but it also hardened their resolve. Humanity had been pushed to the brink, but it wasn't defeated yet. Admiral Hayes gathered his remaining forces, reminding them why they had started this fight in the first place. "For Ethan Carter," he said, his voice steady. "For every human who suffered under the Council's rule. We don't quit, not until justice is served." Though battered and bruised, the Eclipse Armada lived to fight another day. And somewhere far away, Daniel and Rachel Carter prayed that their son's death wouldn't be in vain. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what humanity would do next. After the devastating ambush by the Galactic Council, Admiral Samuel Hayes knew they couldn't afford another direct confrontation. The Eclipse Armada had survived, but it was wounded, both in numbers and morale. They needed a plan that would end the conflict once and for all without risking further loss of life. As he paced the bridge of Eclipse Dawn, Hayes considered their options. Then, an idea came to him. One final gamble. It was risky, dangerous, and could cost more lives. But if it worked, it might force the Council to truly listen. Hayes called Grace Bennett and Lieutenant Ryan Cole into his office. "We're going to overload Nexus Prime's core reactor," he explained. The station relied on a massive power source to function, and if they could sabotage it from within, the resulting explosion would render Nexus Prime uninhabitable, but not destroy it entirely. "It's a controlled demolition," Hayes added. "Enough to cripple their operations but not kill innocent civilians." Grace frowned, her mind racing through the technical challenges. "The reactor is deep inside the station, heavily guarded," she said. "Getting close enough to plant explosives won't be easy." Ryan nodded, already understanding what this meant. Someone would have to go in undercover, and that someone would likely never come back. "I'll do it," Ryan volunteered without hesitation. His voice was calm, but his hands clenched into fists at his sides. After losing Alex Green and so many others, he felt a burning need to make the Council pay. Hayes hesitated, knowing the risks, but eventually gave a reluctant nod. "You won't go alone," he said firmly. Sarah Blake immediately stepped forward. "I'm going with him," she declared. Her tone left no room for argument. Preparations began quickly. Ryan and Sarah disguised themselves as Council technicians, using stolen uniforms and forged credentials provided by Grace. Their mission was simple but perilous: infiltrate Nexus Prime, plant the explosives near the reactor core, and escape before the countdown reached 0. If anything went wrong, there would be no second chances. Under cover of darkness, Ryan and Sarah boarded a small shuttle and approached the station. The Council's forces were still on high alert after the ambush, but the pair managed to slip past patrols undetected. Inside Nexus Prime, the atmosphere was tense. Damaged sections of the station remained unlit, and repair crews worked frantically to restore systems. Ryan and Sarah moved cautiously, sticking to shadowy corridors and avoiding guards. As they neared the reactor chamber, their path was blocked by Chancellor Varnock himself. The leader of the council stood flanked by two enforcers, his expression grim. "You think you can challenge us?" Varnock sneered when he spotted them. For a moment, Ryan froze, unsure how they'd been discovered. But then Sarah spoke up, her voice steady despite the danger. "Your arrogance made you blind," she said. "And now you'll pay for it." Ryan reached for his weapon, ready to fight, but Varnock raised a hand. "Wait," the Chancellor said, his confidence wavering. "Perhaps we can negotiate." Ryan hesitated, surprised by the sudden change in tone. He glanced at Sarah, who gave him a subtle nod. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to finish the job. Still, buying time might help them complete their mission. While Varnock stalled, Sarah quietly activated the explosives, setting the countdown timer. When the Chancellor realized what they were doing, his face turned pale with fury. "You fools," he shouted. "Do you know what you've done?" "We know exactly what we've done," Ryan replied coldly. With the timer running, he and Sarah turned to leave, dodging blasts from Varnock's guards as they raced toward the exit. Behind them, alarms blared, signaling the impending destruction of Nexus Prime. The galaxy watched as the station's lights flickered and died, its heart extinguished by humanity's defiance. The Eclipse Armada waited in silence, knowing the war wasn't over, but justice had been served. The explosion at Nexus Prime sent shockwaves through the galaxy, both literal and figurative. The station's core reactor collapsed in a controlled but devastating implosion, leaving the once mighty hub of the Galactic Council dark and lifeless. Though no innocent lives were lost, the message was clear. Humanity would no longer tolerate oppression or injustice. For Chancellor Varnock and his council, it was a humiliating defeat, one that forced them to reconsider their stance toward Earth. As the Eclipse Armada retreated into the void, its crew watched the aftermath unfold with mixed emotions. Relief mingled with sorrow as they reflected on the sacrifices made to achieve this moment. Lieutenant Ryan Cole sat silently in the cockpit of his fighter, staring out at the stars. He thought about Captain Alex Green and all the others who hadn't made it back. Their deaths weighed heavily on him, but he also felt a sense of pride. They had struck a blow for justice, not just for Ethan Carter, but for every human who had ever been treated as less than equal. Sarah Blake stood beside him, her hands resting on the console. "We did it," she said softly, though her voice carried more exhaustion than triumph. Ryan nodded. "Yeah, we did." But even as he spoke, he knew the fight wasn't truly over. The Council might agree to negotiate now, but old wounds ran deep. Humanity would need to stay vigilant if it wanted to secure a better future. Back on Earth, news of the victory spread quickly. Protests turned into celebrations as people poured into streets and public squares, waving flags and chanting slogans like, "Justice prevails." Daniel and Rachel Carter joined the crowds, holding a picture of their son Ethan. Tears streamed down Rachel's face as she looked around at the sea of faces. "He'd be so proud," she whispered to Daniel. Her husband wrapped an arm around her shoulders, nodding. "He already is." Admiral Samuel Hayes addressed the fleet from the bridge of Eclipse Dawn, his tone somber yet resolute. "Today, we showed the galaxy that humanity won't back down when pushed too far," he said. "But let this not be remembered as an act of vengeance. It's about protecting our freedom and ensuring that tragedies like Ethan's never happen again. We've earned a seat at the table, and now it's up to us to use it wisely." Grace Bennett listened to Hayes' words, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had started this journey of uncovering dusty records in an archive. never imagining it would lead to something so monumental. Now, as she helped guide the fleet home, she couldn't help but think about how much had changed and how much still needed to change. In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Council reached out to the United Earth Government, UAG, with an offer to negotiate. This time, there was no arrogance in their tone, only a grudging acknowledgement of humanity's strength. Representatives from both sides met aboard a neutral vessel, hammering out terms for a new era of cooperation. While tensions remained, the Council agreed to implement reforms aimed at preventing further mistreatment of human colonies. For Daniel and Rachel Carter, seeing these changes brought some measure of peace. They knew nothing could bring Ethan back, but his memory had sparked a movement that reshaped the galaxy. As they stood together under the night sky, gazing at the stars, they felt a glimmer of hope. For themselves, for humanity, and for the countless generations yet to come. The Eclipse Armada returned to Europa, its ships once again hidden beneath the icy surface. Though its mission was complete, the fleet served as a reminder of what humanity could achieve when united by purpose. Justice had been delivered, not through hatred or revenge, but through courage and determination. And as the galaxy moved forward, one truth became undeniable. Humanity's place among the stars was no longer in question. It belonged there, standing tall alongside the oldest civilizations in the cosmos.